Hello, today I'm going to tell you about a very important and beautiful four-planet pattern known as a golden string. The word golden comes from the fact that it's based on the golden mean, also known as the golden ratio. And there are two other patterns also that are very beautiful and very important, also based on the golden mean, and they're known as the golden pyramid and the golden isotrap. So there are three of these patterns that are very, very special: the golden string, the golden isotrap, and the golden pyramids. In this video, I'm going to describe the golden string, and in later videos, I will describe the golden isotrap and the golden pyramids. This is the third video in a series of 7 videos. So in some of those later videos, I will describe the golden isotraps and golden pyramids. This video, I'm going to describe the golden strings. And also, just to give you a preview of where we're headed, there's also something called silver isotraps and silver pyramids. They're not quite as powerful. They don't have the elegance and the symmetry of the golden isotrap and the golden pyramids. So these are the three most powerful and important. They create a very strong effect that pervades the person's entire life. So if you have one of these patterns in your chart, and most people don't have one in their natal chart, although as we will see, these things also can exist in harmonic charts, and you may have one in a harmonic chart. You probably do if you look at enough harmonic charts, but most people do not have one in the natal chart. But when one of these patterns occurs, they're very special. They pervade the whole personality, and they give a kind of depth to the person's personality. So let's look at one. Actress Monica Bellucci has a golden string, and the golden string is Moon, Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn. And the basic idea of a golden string is very simple. It's just the angular distances between the planets get progressively bigger. If I look at it going counterclockwise in her chart, the Moon to Uranus angle, and then from Uranus to Neptune, obviously the Uranus to Neptune is a bigger angle, and it's bigger by how much? By the golden ratio. And then Neptune to Saturn is bigger than Uranus to Neptune by the golden ratio. So the angular distances are increasing by the golden ratio. So another way to think of it is that Uranus is at the golden mean midpoint of Moon Neptune, and Neptune is at a golden mean midpoint of Uranus and Saturn. But remember, there are two golden mean midpoints, and the planets must be at golden mean midpoints that result in the angular distances becoming increasingly larger. So that's the key to the golden string, is that you have two consecutive golden mean midpoint structures. Uranus is at the golden mean midpoint of Moon Neptune, and Neptune's at the golden mean midpoint of Saturn and Uranus, but they must also be in an order that makes the angular distances increasingly larger. If we look at these midpoint structures here, it shows us that Uranus is at the Moon-Neptune midpoint with only a 0.07 orb. This is done as a percentage, where 1% is the maximum allowable. I described this kind of way of doing orbs in the previous video. So Uranus is at the Moon-Neptune, and it's what we call a GM3. Uranus is closer to the Moon, and Neptune is at the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, also a GM3. So it's two GM3 midpoints causing the resulting in the angular distances becoming larger and larger. They could also be getting larger in the opposite direction. So it doesn't matter whether they're getting larger in the counterclockwise direction or in the clockwise direction, as long as these angular distances get larger and larger by the golden mean, you have a golden string. Now, so it's very cool that you have all these planets in golden ratios, but there's something else that makes it even more amazing. What happens when you have these planets in these increasingly larger angular distances, in the larger by the golden ratio, is that one of the planets will end up directly in between two of the others. It's kind of a startling and surprising thing. We don't expect to see a perfect symmetry, one planet being directly in between two others, because we're dealing with golden ratios. But that's part of the magic of golden ratios. It has these unusual, beautiful results. And in this case, it's Neptune is at the Moon-Saturn midpoint. So it's shown here in this midpoint structure, Neptune opposition Moon-Saturn with a 12-minute orb. So in other words, let me summarize this. What happens is that you have 4 planets in increasingly larger angular distances by the golden ratio, and when that happens, one planet will be at the direct midpoint of 2 others. And that's what reinforces and strengthens this pattern. So what this means is that Monica Bellucci has a very strong Neptune Moon Saturn, which is quiet. It's thoughtful. It's deep. It's meditative. It's reflective. Excuse me. She needs time to meditate, to reflect, to feel deeply. Too much noise and commotion will drive her. Well, it won't drive her crazy, but it'll make her unhappy. She needs a depth of feeling. But then Uranus is involved with these golden ratio relationships, giving inspiration. So what you end up with in a pattern like this is a person that's an artist, a visionary, a person who loves music and inspired architecture and art. They're visionaries. They're deep and thoughtful and looking for creativity, freshness, newness. Uranus Neptune is inspired. So we looked at charts of people that are dysfunctional, murderers, drug addicts, having the Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. So what happens here is that this kind of pattern with a Moon, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune tends to be a saint or sinner, sometimes a little bit of both pattern. If the person grows up in a situation with a lot of trauma or neglect, they can just become paranoid, depressed, manic depressive. They can be delusional. It can go very, very negative. If they have a supportive environment, or somehow they have the inner strength to overcome that, they become deep, wise, inspired people, often inspired by classical arts, but inspirational, not cookie cutter, not repetitive, not just carrying on a tradition, because Uranus is involved. So the person's a little bit of a mad genius, you might say. There's a wisdom, an inspiration, and a depth, highly sensitive. And this direct midpoint structure really strengthens and reinforces the whole thing. And what happens with the golden mean aspects, as I've mentioned in the other videos, is that they're instinctive, they're natural, they take them for granted. So the person's inspired, visionary. They don't usually, pursue, psychic development or things like that. They use the inspiration and sensitivity in some other activity. Well, where would you use inspiration and sensitivity? In art, music, architecture, theater, things like that. So we get this feeling of somebody who needs the quiet. Whenever you see Moon Saturn, there's a need to retreat into one's inspiration and get inspired, awakened by it. So that's the basic thing that's going on here, and that's very important. If you're wondering about all these numbers out here, this is simply showing that Uranus is at the golden mean midpoint of Moon and Neptune, 0.382 to 0.618 relationship, and Neptune is at the golden mean of Saturn and Uranus, and this is 0.382 to 0.618 in this relationship. So Uranus and Neptune are in a 0.382 to 6.618 in relationship to Saturn, and they're also 0.618 in relationship to the moon Uranus, which is a 0.382. So it's just an increase. Sometimes this drives you a little crazy thinking about these numbers, but the easy way to think about it is they're just in golden ratio relationship to each other, spiraling larger and larger. And that's the key, again, to the thing that makes it a golden string is 4 planets in golden ratio relationships and increasingly larger larger angular distances, and it gets reinforced by the direct midpoint structure. That's the special pattern. It can give a special power. And Monica Bellucci has that special power. She's a charismatic, commanding presence. It gives her that star power, the depth, and a more classical, not a light, frivolous pop kind of stardom, but something deep. And she lives in a more magical world than most people. She has tons of money. She grew up in Italy with, which is living in an inspired environment. Of course, the chart, you can grow up anywhere, but she grew up in that place, and she loves that world of inspiration and sensitivity, the imagination, the culture, the vision. So she lives in a more magical world than most people, with all of her houses and assets, but she also is quiet. She went through a divorce, and we're going to read some information later, in these later slides, about how she talks about how she likes this time of solitude and being alone, and that's the Neptune at Moon Saturn. So her quiet, commanding, and inspired lifestyle, her liking to be alone, meditative and reflective, but in an inspired and visionary world, and the characters she plays, the theater she's engaged in, her commanding charisma, she lives in that world. So she's created a life where she can be this, and I think it gives her some of her star power. Her commanding, inspired presence is in this pattern. So when these golden mean patterns are handled well, they give special effects. The problem with a pattern like this, with Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, which is so psychically disruptive, is that the person can get a little bit crazy, negative. She's managed to not do that. I think the supportive, loving family, her success in life, somehow she's managed to bring out, for the most part, the best in this. And when you bring out the best, you get that commanding presence and inspired lifestyle that she lives. She lives a much more inspired life than most of us do. So she's managed to achieve this. And I think this captures a lot of the soul of Monica Bellucci. Now, this is not everything. We're going to see there are other patterns in her chart that represent other sides to herself. But hopefully you can feel this, not just hear my words, but when you go inside the chart and you feel what's going on, you can feel how these energies are working within the person. Okay, so here I talk about how the angular distance between the planets is in the golden ratio relationship. The Moon-Uranus angle is 39 degrees 27 minutes. You can pause this and go over this if you are interested in the technical details, but all it's saying is that these angular distances between these planets are in the golden ratio. And again, it can be in either clockwise or counterclockwise direction. So in her case, the angular distances are getting larger in the counterclockwise. It could also be in the clockwise direction. Either way, you're going to get a golden string. Okay, and for those of you who are interested in in the math, it's probably very few of you, but if you're wondering how there could be a direct midpoint structure, this shows you the algebra of how you would solve this. That here's one golden mean midpoint structure, the Moon, Uranus, Neptune. Here's the other one, and if you scale this one by multiplying by 1.618 to the other one, you end up with a 0.382, 0.618, 1.0. This plus this equals 1. So Neptune is at the direct midpoint of Moon, Saturn. Anyway, if you're interested in how these things can get solved mathematically, that's there. I know most of you aren't interested in that. You can just take my word for it that when you have this golden string, you also end up with a direct midpoint structure, which really is the finishing touch, makes it such a powerful, important pattern. So if I was to, for example, write a computer interpretation of what this Moon, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune pattern means, here's the interpretation I would give. Monica enjoys time by herself. Continuous noise or commotion can make her unravel emotionally. She is very inspired and appreciates the uplifting and inspiring works of masters of the arts, and she is inclined to live in a world of art, literature, theater, and spirituality. Monica lives in a world of her dreams. She is more sensitive and more deeply affected by moods, colors, sounds, etc. than most people. So I hope you can feel how I come up with this interpretation. Moon, Saturn tends to separate people out. They need times by themselves. The Uranus Inspiration, the Uranus Neptune, what are you going to do with all this inspiration and sensitivity and depth that comes from the Saturn involved in this? It leads to things like this. And here I would give an interpretation about how a pattern like this tends to go to one extreme or the other. So if brought up in a kind and loving family and community, she's likely to be an enormous inspiration to others. On the other hand, experiences of trauma and neglect would incline her to veer in the opposite direction of misanthropic feelings and even cruelty. Even in the best of circumstances, she needs more time than most people for reflection and meditation to be fully functional and content. There is a saint or sinner tendency, as her high sensitivity pushes her to be very inspired and very charismatic as well. So this is to give you an idea of how we come up with a final interpretation for these things. With the direct midpoint structure has a very strongly tones this whole pattern. I may make videos at some point in the future on how I interpret every pair of planets, how Moon, Saturn causes people to need to be alone, to feel deeply, to turn off everything, and Neptune to find inspiration in that. Okay, now here's something Monica Bellucci said, and if I had not looked at her chart, I would not appreciate what she's saying here. I might just think she's just blathering away, but wow, this reflects exactly what I've just described about her. This is, I've got the website address where I copied and pasted this from. She says, I am extraordinarily connected with myself, and I like to give this message to my daughters for their future. It is not obligatory to have a husband or partner. Solitude should not scare us. After many years as a couple, a period of personal reflection cannot but be welcomed. You know, if I didn't see her chart and see this whole midpoint pattern and this golden string, I would not appreciate the power of these words. She's really revealing a lot about her soul, her life experience. I love this phrase, I'm extraordinarily connected with myself. If I hadn't looked at her chart, I might just think, well, you know, English is not her first language. It sounds kind of awkward. But it's really saying, she's like saying, I have Neptune opposition the Moon, Saturn midpoint in part of a golden string. She really is extraordinarily connected with herself when she takes the time to feel and experience deeply. So this really is a very deep revelation about something that's very important to her, and we can see it in this golden string. So here's some more information about her. Just think about this. She's considered to be one of the most beautiful and sexy women in the world. She's very wealthy. She has access to all the stuff, and she's choosing after her divorce to have time alone to just be with her children, really reflects her wisdom and her attunement to this planetary pattern. Okay, so for the most part, she's doing the right things to have a healthy and positive life. The fact is, most people get caught up in this stardom, do not do what Monica Bellucci is doing. But she is in tune with this part of her chart, and she's expressing it, and it's working for her. Here she talks about, they ask her about her religious views, and she says, if there's something I believe in, it's a mysterious energy, the one that fills the oceans during tides, the one that unites nature and beings. So she's the kind of person who really feels and experiences things deeply. This really reflects this pattern in her chart. Very eloquently stated. And here she talks about how when her daughter was born, she was ready to give the time to that. And she says, I have done so many things in my life, been to so many places, had some great times. But now she gets bored, surrounded by people smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol. I'm not so interested now in going to premieres or being photographed on the red carpet. I want to be with her, referring to her daughter. Well, if Monica Bellucci only had this golden string, she would have never been on the red carpet in the first place. Why is she out on the red carpet? Why did she retreat from that activity? What brought her out into that activity? And what you have to remember when you're looking at somebody's astrology chart is there are many patterns. Not one pattern does not describe everything. And typically, when a person is very dynamic and outgoing, out on the red carpet and pursuing all these things, they have some dynamic pattern, often in the 8th harmonic chart, like a Mars, Jupiter, Uranus, or a restlessness and dynamic energy in the 11th harmonic chart. And when we look at Monica Bellucci's 11th harmonic chart, we find out why she's been out and about on the red carpet. She was going to college. She left college to be a model, went up to Milan, and got involved in the whole high energy commercial world. And in her 11th harmonic, Mars conjunct Uranus very tightly squared Jupiter, and Jupiter's in a grand trine with Mercury and Pluto. This Mars-Uranus square Jupiter, very, very close, the whole thing within about a degree orb. That's a dynamic powerhouse, restless energy. Her sun and moon are also in 11th harmonic, on the go. So she's got two sides to herself. And she's done this dynamic, active energy, and she finds that she has to pull away and have the solitude. But she'll need to do both. She won't be able to just live in this solid solitude and quiet, inspired environment. She'll, at some point, she'll swing back and want to be active and dynamic again. So that's what happens. Is we don't express every part of our chart all the time. We often give attention to one part of our chart in one period of our life, and then another part of our energy system at another part of our life. But sooner or later, these energies have to get expressed. So we see the whole character of Monica Bellucci. We see one side of her in the golden string and her charisma, her power, her magical world she lives in, her depth, the time she has with her solitude, the way she goes to the depth of characters, into the dark parts of them, the magical characters she plays, all of this and her charisma in doing it, all in the golden string. And here we see her dynamic, restless activity that brought her out into the commercial world. If she only had the golden string, she wouldn't be out there in that dynamic outer world and the the whole commercial world and all the glitter and glamour of it all. So I talked about this. Interested in the very deepest hopes and dreams and visions of people. And she talks about this also in her acting, and other people mention it too. In this review of her work at this website, the reviewer talks about her supremely controlled physicality and poise, her classical beauty, her uncanny ability to stir up the spirits of an older, more elemental cinema. Wow, that just gives me chills, because that is her golden string. Classical beauty, well, I don't know about beauty, but classical, the depth of her Neptune, Moon, Saturn, uncanny ability to stir up the spirits, the Uranus. She's deep, she's inspired, she's got that magic, her hypnotic power in a war. So it's an expression of the depth and heightened sensitivity of that golden string. So my point is that when you interpret the chart, you can really feel the soul of the person, the way that they experience life, and what they bring to the world. And here she talks about how she likes to play roles that go deep, that explore the dark side of humanity. That's why I'm an actor. She's an actor in order to explore those depths and the dark side. And Moon, Saturn, Uranus is inclined to a kind of darkness, a kind of inspiration that goes off the rails, and she goes right into the depth of that. The Passion of the Christ. It doesn't get much deeper and more. The torment, the all these roles she's played. She played one of her famous roles as she's married in the role she's playing. The husband leaves, and she has to resort to prostitution. These are the kinds of agonizing, soul-searching depths that explore what our real values are, the conflicts, all part of the depth and inspiration of that golden string. Wild dreams and visions, loneliness, grief, existential challenges that the mortality of ourselves and our loved ones brings into our lives. Also, she is an actress, and typically you'll see very strong 17th harmonic chart. Strong patterns in 17th harmonic chart. She does have a very, very strong Moon, Mercury, Saturn, T-square. So I'm just mentioning different aspects and how all these things work together to affect the person. And my last thing I want to mention in this particular video is that I'm emphasizing that Uranus-Neptune, when you bring Uranus and Neptune together, you get the inspiration, the tendency to be way out there, visionary, psychic, the inclination or delusional. So often in astrology we say that Neptune is psychic and idealistic and spiritual and fantasy. It's actually Uranus-Neptune that leads to wild inspirations. Saturn-Neptune dislikes glamour and superficiality, tends to be cynical and seeking something sincere. So to explore this idea that Uranus and Neptune lead people, that's what leads people to, for example, drugs, these hugely inspired and disrupted psychic states, is Uranus-Neptune. So if we take the most extreme Uranus-Neptune people we can think of, three people that occurred to me are Timothy Leary, who made a career out of psychedelic drugs, you could say. His friend Ram Dass, who also was involved with this whole psychedelic drug experience, and then went on a more, you could call it spiritual path, or less drug emphasis, and more of a disciplined activity. And if we think of all the musicians, all the rock musicians who are heavily involved with drugs, one that really stands out to me is Jerry Garcia. And we can't whitewash the fact that he was an addict. For example, here's a website address that describes how he was a drug addict and how some of his fellow band members explain what a strong part the drug addiction played in his life. If we look at the charts of these people, we will usually see midpoint structures. And now what I'm seeing, now that I'm aware of this golden mean, in Jerry Garcia, we see the golden mean midpoint structures. So I'm going to make a video, the next video in this series, exploring these charts just as a fun way to explore an idea. It's not as controlled research as I explained in the previous video where we go through a database, but just to see if we can confirm that these extreme people do have what we expect. And well, in a way it is a controlled study because I picked only these three people. There were just three that occurred to me. And the way that Uranus-Neptune gets involved in Timothy Leary's chart is almost unbelievable. You don't get a much stronger Uranus-Neptune than that. So I want to just show that because it's part of the theory that we've run into, and we will see golden mean show up, at least in Jerry Garcia's chart. So we'll look at their charts in the next video, and then I will go on and describe the golden pyramid and the golden isotraps and show you some charts where they are very important. So that's it for this video, my friends. Thank you very much for listening. God bless. Namaste.